Astro 1.0 just released and it's pretty awesome. In this video we're going to learn what Astro is, how to set up a new Astro project, and see how we can integrate a front-end framework into Astro. So let's get started. Astro is an easy to use static site generator that is heavily influenced off HTML that introduces what is called the islands architecture. This allows you to split up your app into individual islands, hence the name. Astro is heavily influenced off traditional HTML for its built-in language, meaning you won't have to learn yet another syntax to start using this framework. However, what makes this framework so unique is that you can even use your favorite front-end frameworks such as Vue, React, Svelte, and more. Astro basically allows you to build out static sites as you normally would with traditional HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but in a more elegant modern way, allowing for a more scalable solution. For example, instead of creating individual files for each page and defining the same header and footer within each one of these, we can encapsulate this into an Astro component or even your favorite front-end framework for that matter, and then dynamically add it to each page. With traditional methods, you'd have to copy and paste that same markup in each one of your files, and if you ever want to change it, well, that's just going to be a very tedious process. Now, by default, Astro ships zero JavaScript to the browser and only renders in static HTML. This is going to result in a better first load performance, which is very important for SEO. Most front-end frameworks such as Vue are going to hydrate your application with JavaScript on the initial page load, making the site into a single page application where all the page rendering happens on the client side. With single page applications, the initial request to the website will reach out to the server to get the HTML, then hydrate that web page with JavaScript. Then all future pages will then use the JavaScript to produce the new pages. Astro creates what is called a multiple page application where each time that we request a new page, we make a request to the server to obtain that HTML. Now, you might be wondering what option should I choose for my application, and that's going to mainly depend on the project that you're building, and yes, I know that you probably hate that answer, so let me further explain. Single page applications are great for heavy user interactions and dynamic data-driven sites. Astro is going to be great for more content-driven websites such as a blog, a portfolio, or even a documentation site. Now, even with sites like these, we still might need user interaction, and Astro actually gives you complete control over this using the islands architecture. Astro's island architecture handles each component individually like an island. Initially, by default, these islands won't hydrate and they're just going to be rendered as static HTML. If you do have any JavaScript, it's going to be ran ahead of time and then stripped from the final page you send to the users. However, if we do need interaction for a specific component, we can inform Astro to hydrate only that specific component instead of the entire application. And this is what's going to separate Astro from tools such as Next or Next.js, where you just can't have this level of optimization without loading the entire page with JavaScript. Okay, now that we have a little background on Astro, let's jump in and see how we can create a new Astro project. Within VS Code, let's open up a new integrated terminal and run the command npm create astro at latest. This will prompt the options to create a new project. For the name, we're going to leave this as default. Next, we want to select a template. We have a few options to choose from, but for the sake of simplicity for this video, we're just going to do the basics. We then want to install all of the dependencies, and again for the sake of simplicity, we won't be using TypeScript, so I'll select prefer not to use. Once that's complete, we'll be ready to spin up the local development server to view the Astro application. To do this, you want to cd into the project folder and run the command npm run dev. This will spin up the application on localhost port 3000 by default, and if we take a look at this URL inside of the browser, we can see the default Astro application. With the project up and running, let's take a look at the structure of an Astro app. If we expand the project folder, we have a few notable directories and files, such as the source directory for the project source code, the public directory for unprocessed assets such as your images and icons, and then the package.json and Astro configuration file. Inside of the source folder, we have a few folders for the components, layouts, and then pages. The components folder will contain the reusable logic of the application such as a header, a footer, or even a profile card. These can be the built-in Astro files or your preferred front-end framework components. In the ship demo, we get a good idea of how to create Astro files. An Astro file is split up into two different sections, the component script for the JavaScript and then the components template for the HTML and styles. To separate the component script and component template, Astro uses what is called code fencing. And within the component script, you can write any JavaScript needed for that component. In this example, props are being declared which are being passed in from the parent in which the component is being used. Again, the important thing to know when you use JavaScript within the components is by default this is all going to run ahead of time, and then the JavaScript is going to be stripped from the page for the visiting users. Now, if you do want a component to hydrate with JavaScript, we have a few options using what is called the client directive, and we'll see more of this later within the video. Below the component script, we have the components template, which is made up of the HTML and then a style tag. We can insert the markup just beneath the code fencing, and then after this we can include a style tag for all the styles. One thing to also note is by default all of the styles are going to be automatically scoped to that component. Next we have the layouts folder, which if you're familiar with Nuxt.js is very similar. Layouts are used to create reusable page templates. Now in this demo we have a generic layout, and again we have props being defined for the title of the page, and then within the body of this layout we have a slot which will be for all of the page content. Lastly, we have the pages folder. Astro has what is called a file-based routing system, meaning that each file that is created within this directory will automatically have a route created for it. This app currently only has an index.astro file, which will be rendered as the default path within the application. In this file, the layout that was created inside of the layouts folder is being imported into the file's component script and then referenced within the components template. And the content within this layout will replace the slot tag we've seen within the layout itself. Alright, now that we have a new project set up and we have some familiarity with how Astro works, let's look at how we can integrate a front-end framework alongside Astro. Since this channel focuses mainly on Vue, that is what we're going to be using. However, you can use other frameworks such as React or even Svelte. Within the integrated terminal, we want to run the command npm run astro add vue. It will inform you of the changes that will be made. You'll want to continue and install the dependencies. And it's as simple as that. Vue is now going to be available to use inside of our Astro project. If we look at the Astro's config, we can see Vue being imported and then defined within the integrations. Let's take a look at using a Vue component within our Astro project. For this, I'm going to do some cleanup within the pages file and remove some of the content from this file. Now inside of our components folder, let's create a new Vue component and we'll call this colorpicker.vue. Within this component, to demonstrate how to use Vue within Astro, we're going to add an input and perform what is called two-way binding with a variable and then output that variable within the browser. Let's create a new variable called color and set this equal to a ref to make the variable reactive. Inside of the template, we need to create an input and sync the variable to the input value using a vModel directive and set the value of the directive equal to our variable. And lastly, below our input, let's output the color variable itself. Now inside of the pages file, we need to import and define this component. Now inside of the browser, we can see we have our input and then the outputted color variable. Now if we go to type in the input, as you can see, the input does not update. The reason why this doesn't work is by default, remember, all the JavaScript is going to be stripped. This is more clear if we run the command npm run build to build out this application, followed by npm run generate to preview this inside of the browser. Now if we navigate to the browser and open up our console and filter out by JavaScript, as you can see we don't have any. If we want this component to be interactive, which is what we're trying to do, we want to hydrate the component using what is called a client directive and set the value of this to load. This is going to hydrate the component on the page load. Now if we head back to the browser and type in the input now, as you can see the content is going to update with the value that is inside of the input because the component is now hydrated with JavaScript. There is other directives we can use to further improve this app when it comes to hydrating it with JavaScript. Another useful one would be visible. How this works is it uses what is called an intersection observer to detect when the component is within the user's view and then hydrates that component with JavaScript. So if we set the client directive to load on the color picker component, then we add a margin on the top to push us down the page, we can see within the browser once it's within the view, then the JavaScript will be loaded in. Alright, that's going to be it for this introduction to Astro. Hopefully you now have a good understanding of this framework. If you do want to see more Astro videos here on the channel, be sure to leave a like on this video down below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.